I'm gonna teach this bear to drive. Whoa! And the yellow light means speed up.
Well, couldn't keep away from the kart racing genre for long now, could I? It should be no surprise by now that I've got a huge soft spot for this subgenre of racing game, given just how many kart races are covered in video form in the past few years. And this isn't a recent development either. I've been obsessed with this style of game since I was really young, to the point that, if I remember correctly, my very first video game was a kart racer, Crash Team Racing in particular. And even if I'm misremembering, CTR still played a huge part in my exposure and initial love for the genre. That said, it wasn't the only influence. Two other examples in particular come to mind, Mario Kart 64 and, more importantly in this video's context, Diddy Kong Racing. While it may not be as constantly in the public attention nowadays when it comes to kart racers, especially compared to Mario Kart or CTR, Diddy Kong Racing was a pretty big deal back in the day. It was a kart racer coming out in a post-Mario Kart 64 world, being developed by one of the most renowned game studios at the time, Rareware, having just come off incredible successes both in the console market with the Donkey Kong Country series and the arcade market with the Killer Instinct games. The game began development shortly after Killer Instinct 2 had come out, starting as a wholly original IP with a cast of characters heavily influenced by the kind of characters that you'd see at Disney World. Ironically, we would get a Disney World themed kart racer a few years after Diddy Kong Racing. Titles such as Wild Cartoon Kingdom and Pro-Am 64 were used for the game during this period. However, with their planned holiday season title at the time, Banjo-Kazooie, being delayed to the following year, they pushed this game to be their big holiday release, and quickly realized their original IP likely wasn't going to be strong enough to ensure strong enough sales for the holidays. So hey, why not throw in that funny monkey they made for the DKC games and market the game as his? And thus, Pro-Am 64 became Diddy Kong Racing. The game was released in the holiday of 1997, and despite its competition, with Mario Kart 64 having come out in North America earlier that same year, Diddy Kong Racing did incredibly well commercially, going on to become one of the N64's best-selling titles at 4.8 million copies. In fact, according to some reports, it actually briefly held the record for fastest-selling game of all time in North America, selling over 1 million units in just 3 weeks. Certainly helped that its critical reception was just as strong at launch, with many critics claiming it was actually better than Mario Kart 64, something I personally agree with. And with the history lesson now over, how about we get to the game itself and talk about why it's such a great kart racer even after all these years. The first thing of note is that, very uncommonly for the genre at the time, Diddy Kong Racing has itself a full-fledged story. You're never going to see that in a Mario Kart game. Now granted, much of the pre-gameplay story stuff is relegated to the instruction manual, which it never actually had, so plot beats like the game's villain Whizpig being an alien caught me off guard when first experiencing them as a kid. But despite that, the story's pretty straightforward to follow. According to the manual, Timber the Tiger had been left in charge of his home island while his parents were spending their summer with the Kong family. But during that time, the island was invaded and taken over by the previously mentioned Whizpig, a chaos-loving space traveler who's been planet-hopping, seeking ways to keep himself from getting bored. Not wanting his parents to come back home to an island conquered by a giant alien pig, Timber writes out to his friend Diddy for help, who joins the effort to help free the island. Whizpig's antics also happen to disrupt the island's genie guardian, Taj, who decides to set up a racing competition to determine a champion to go up against Whizpig. It wasn't needed, but I do appreciate that the game actually went out of its way to explain why everyone's racing in the first place. It seemed kind of counterproductive otherwise. But that's all stuff you find in the manual. As far as the game itself is concerned, Whizpig needs to be beaten in a race, do a bunch of stuff that'll allow you to do so. I can get behind that. Now upon starting up the game, you're actually greeted first and foremost with the character select screen, rather than any sort of mode select like most other racing games. An interesting choice, but hey, that just gives me a good opportunity to talk about this. Something you'll notice very early on with Diddy Kong Racing is that it has a very pleasant charm all throughout, and this character select screen alone does a great job with showcasing that. You're not picking from a selection of character icons, you're passing a player number plaque between the characters, all while those not holding it bounce and dance along to the super catchy theme playing. And that be effective enough, but the geniuses at Rareware decide to give each character their own unique version of the theme, which dynamically shifts between each version as you highlight the different characters. This is one of those songs I find impossible not to bounce along with when I listen to it. It's really well done. Then again, that's just the soundtrack as a whole, but I'll get more into that later. But yeah, like I said, this does a great job of giving off the kind of charm you'll be witnessing throughout the game, so it makes for a solid first impression. Also, I like that if you cancel your selection, the character will have some form of response, whether it be disappointment, annoyance, surprise, or banjo noises. Actually, on that note, there might be a few non-Diddy Kong Racing faces you recognize in this roster, aside from Diddy himself. In particular, this game marks the debut of two of Rareware's future platformer protagonists, Banjo of the Banjo-Kazooie games, and Conker, albeit being nothing like his eventual Bad Fur Days self. Though actually, given Banjo-Kazooie was already nearing completion when Diddy Kong Racing came out, it does make me wonder if Banjo was already planned to be in the game before Banjo-Kazooie got delayed, or if he got brought in at the same time as Diddy as a teaser character of sorts. Now, gameplay-wise, Diddy Kong Racing is, well, a kart racer. Shocker, I know. 8 racers, 3 laps, first to finish wins, about as straightforward as you can get. That said, Diddy Kong Racing does have some unique mechanics up its sleeves to allow it to stand out from Mario Kart 64 and the many kart racers that followed. 2 mechanics in particular. The first is how power-ups work. The usual power-up system in a kart racer is, of course, the random item box. You break it, it randomly gives you a power-up for you to use. Diddy Kong Racing, however, doesn't do this. Instead, having all of its item boxes, or item balloons rather, be color-coded, with each color correlating to a specific power-up. Red balloons give missiles, blue balloons give speed boost, green balloons give defensive weapons to drop from behind, and so on and so forth. Though that's not where it stops, as if you hit another balloon of the same color before using your power-up will upgrade, with a total of 3 variants per power-up. 2 red balloons give you a homing missile, 2 green balloons turn your oil slick into a mine, with 3 turning into a bubble trap, etc. This completely changes the power-up dynamic in Kiddy Kong. It's definitely not Kiddy Kong Racing. This completely changes the power-up dynamic in Diddy Kong Racing. You're not working off RNG in this case. The power-ups you get are entirely your own doing, allowing for a lot more strategic use of them. What do you seek out and when? How long do you hold on to it? Or do you throw it aside in favor of something else? And how long can you avoid hitting a 3rd red balloon and degrading your homing missile into 10 non-homing missiles? Most kart racers still do the random item box system, but I have played a few other kart racers that have done their own spin on this concept, such as LEGO Racers having color-coded brick power-ups and white bricks that upgrade the power-up, with the white bricks carrying over if a different colored brick is hit before the item's used. Or Chocobo Racing, with its specifically marked magic spell items that upgrade from picking up the same multiple times, but with the added strategy of being able to hold multiple spells at once. So yeah, it's cool to see some other titles try this unique take on power-ups that Diddy Kong Racing brought to the table. Though the other unique mechanic is one of its more known features. You're not bound to just a kart in Diddy Kong Racing, as you can also race in a hovercraft and an airplane, and most of the tracks in this game allow you to choose which vehicle to use for the race. Now I will admit, I think some tracks handle this feature better than others. Some are so clearly designed around a specific vehicle type that choosing anything else is basically slapping a handicap on yourself. That said, the tracks that do handle it well often include routes or shortcuts that's accessible by a specific vehicle type, giving each one their own advantage. Sure, you may slip around like crazy in Walrus Cove with the hovercraft, but being able to drive on the ice without the fear of bouncing around is quite helpful. Sure, most of the boost panels in Jungle Falls are on the ground and thus not as easy to hit with the plane, but the plane gives you access to power-ups completely unreachable by the other 2 vehicles. And sure, using the plane makes some parts of Spaceport Alpha easier than with the car or hovercraft, but the car and hovercraft also have far less to worry about in this crazy corridor of laser fire. Heck, even without the choosing your vehicle aspect, the inclusion of these other vehicle types adds a lot of identity to Diddy Kong Racing, both from a gameplay perspective and a level design perspective. Each track feels a lot more distinct from one another because of it, and it helps that all 3 vehicle types are fun to use. Well, some more than others. I'll be the first to admit that I don't like the hovercraft as much as the car or plane, but all 3 are still fun to use regardless. And while the driving mechanics and controls don't quite have that same level of depth as something like CTR, there is still a pretty strong learning curve in this game, with the use of the brake slide and especially with the boost trick, where hitting a boost panel or using a boost power-up while not holding the A button will give you a much stronger boost. The point is, the core racing in Diddy Kong Racing is very satisfying, regardless of which vehicle you're using. The only thing is that some elements of handling do differ per character, and this is one of those kart racers with invisible stats, so that can be a bit irritating if you're not familiar with each character's strengths and weaknesses. For example, never take Tip Top or Pipsy to a boss race that uses the hovercraft. Ever. Actually, on the topic of boss races, how's about we talk about another one of Diddy Kong Racing's genre-defining features? At the time, most, if not all, kart racers stuck with the classic Grand Prix formula for their main single-player content. Diddy Kong Racing, on the other hand, throws that formula out the window in favor of a full-fledged adventure mode. You're dropped into a hub world where you can access multiple worlds filled with standard races, boss races, challenges that require further knowledge of each track's layout, special non-racing challenges, and Grand Prix. Okay, so the game doesn't throw the Grand Prix formula out the window, rather it places the Grand Prix formula on top of the very large desk that is the adventure mode, and this metaphor is falling into pieces. But yeah, all that, plus a fully explorable hub world that you can use to practice your driving skills. Hey, wait a minute, that sounds familiar.
You can travel around this area and practice your driving skills.
Oh. So yeah, if you needed proof to the kind of impact Diddy Kong Racing's adventure mode structure left on the genre, CTR went to do pretty much the exact same thing with its own single-player campaign mode. And while I don't believe it's been outright confirmed that Diddy Kong Racing was the inspiration behind that decision, it's pretty clear that it was. Plus, it was confirmed that one of Diddy Kong Racing's tracks was recreated by Naughty Dog for CTR's prototype. So yeah, I think it's safe to say it was. Now on that note, I had previously said that I felt CTR did the adventure mode hub world thing better than Diddy Kong Racing. But honestly, I think they're about even, each having their own strengths. For instance, I do prefer CTR having one giant interconnected map with multiple themed areas, rather than what Diddy Kong Racing does with sectioning off the tracks in their own separate hub areas. But on the flip side, Diddy Kong Racing's hub world has additional challenges, like Taj's one-on-one races and hidden collectibles scattered throughout the area, the latter being something CTR's hub world wouldn't have until the remake. For lack of a better comparison, structurally, CTR's hub world is more of a Peach's Castle, while Diddy Kong Racing's is more of a Comet Observatory, and both do have their merits. But yeah, Diddy Kong Racing's adventure mode is great. In a way, it kind of fuses the kart racer with the collectathon, with its incentive of collectibles to unlock new areas, but also a more non-linear approach to the order you tackle these challenges for the most part. For instance, the second world is unlocked with just 2 golden balloons, and with multiple golden balloons hidden in the overworld itself, you wouldn't even need to set foot, or tire I guess, into the first world before accessing it. Golden balloons are your main collectible, obtained mostly from winning races, but also from partaking in Taj's challenges, and as I noted a moment ago, some are also hidden in the overworld. You use golden balloons to unlock new worlds and tracks, and by beating all the tracks in a world, you get access to that world's boss. And this here is a good example of how to do boss fights in a kart racer. The bosses are all much bigger than you, and all have their own unique tracks that you can't access elsewhere, thus providing very distinct challenges from the average race. Sure, some of them will just spam power-ups as their means of slowing you down, but all the other factors do help them feel more effective as bosses than, say, how CTR does it. And these bosses are no slouch either, making for genuinely challenging opponents, all while giving each the vehicles a chance to shine. Racing a Triceratops up a spiral mountain? Hey, wait a minute. In the car, racing a walrus down a snowy mountain in the hovercraft, racing a mine-dropping octopus around a lagoon in the hovercraft, and finally racing a dragon through caverns and across plains in, well, the plane. Each are very standout from one another, even when reusing vehicles. But beating the bosses ain't enough. After winning a world's boss race, you're given access to that world's Silver Coin Challenge, which rewards you with additional golden balloons for winning races. But this time while also finding 8 silver coins hidden across the tracks. These here are arguably some of Diddy Kong Racing's hardest challenges, requiring great knowledge of each track's layout, as the silver coins can often be tucked away really well, or may require an obtuse way to reach them. And again, all while still ensuring you win the race. Now granted, I do think, like with the alternate vehicles feature, some tracks handle this better than others, as some tracks are a bit simplistic for a mode like this. Haunted Woods, for example, one of the last tracks in the game and one with basically no shortcuts or hidden paths, so the silver coins are all kinda just there. That said, I do think these make for fun challenges, testing you not just on your knowledge of a track's layout, but also on determining the best route to get the silver coins and still win the race. And then you're required to take on that world's boss again once the silver coin challenges are done, only this time they're either faster or change up their attack patterns. Bubbler the Octopus in particular swaps out the mines in favor of bubble traps, thus making him the most annoying boss in the game. Though, upon beating the bosses the second time, they provide you with a piece of the Whizpig amulet, and once the amulet's been fully put together, you get access to the game's ultimate peak and challenge, Whizpig himself. And for once, that claim isn't unwarranted. He even T-poses on the way down to make sure you know he means business. The race against Wizpig is easily the hardest part of the game, and by a very large margin. In every other boss race, the track's littered with the occasional power-up balloon, either to slow the boss down or speed yourself up. But in this race, you have no such luck, as there's not a single balloon on the track. You're relying on purely skill this time around. And that's no exaggeration, as this race requires borderline perfection in your use of the game's mechanics to snag the victory. If you haven't figured out how to properly use that boost trick I mentioned earlier, your chances of winning are basically impossible. And with both the limited boost panels and the narrow structure of many parts of the track, mastery of the game's handling is also a necessity. To put it simply, the Wizpig race is an intense difficulty spike, and one that, based on what I've read, many out there who grew up with this game still have yet to overcome. Heck, I struggled with it a ton during my playthrough for this video, though that'd be because I forgot that for the boost trick to work to its fullest, you need to not accelerate for the full duration of the boost. Starting to accelerate while it's still going will cancel out the speed while not canceling out the animation, making it seem like nothing's wrong. This is something I tended to do, which made it impossible to keep up with Wizpig. But once I remembered how the boost trick works, it only took me a couple more attempts until I finally beat him. The Wizpig race is a brutal test of your skills, but man, if it ain't satisfying to finally succeed. And to think, that's all just to get the normal ending. More content awaits in Adventure Mode, requiring you to not only have all the golden balloons and to have beaten Wizpig, but now to also get first place in all 4 trophy races. Feels a bit like padding, but it's not too big a deal. Besides, the payoff's worth it, as you unlock the 5th and final world, Future Funland. 4 more tracks to race on, each with their own silver coin challenge, and once those last few challenges are done, and you've gotten the TT amulet pieces from the battle challenges, I'll go more into those soon, you get a chance to take on Wizpig yet again. And he's a lot easier this time. He may be riding a rocket this time around, but this second race is far less demanding of your skills, and you have access to power-ups to slow him down and speed you up. Granted, the track in question has lasers aplenty to bring you to a halt, but it definitely feels a lot less extreme than the first race against Wizpig. Now, on one hand, it is strange that the true final boss is notably easier than the normal ending's final boss, but on the other hand, I do like to think of the second race as more of a victory lap. You've beaten Wizpig at his best, and now you're on his turf to show him up and ensure he doesn't bother you or your friends again. Plus, the track itself does still have some challenge to it, with narrow passages to fly through and the previously mentioned laser fire. So while much easier, this final race is still both exciting and satisfying. Now, once you beat Wizpig the second time, you unlock a new mode called Adventure 2. It's largely the same as the regular adventure mode, except the golden balloons are replaced with silver disco ball balloons, the tracks are all mirrored, left is right and right is left, and most notably, the silver coin challenges are even harder than before, with the silver coins having new hiding places that are even trickier to access while still needing to assure victory. May not seem like much, but trust me, even just flipping the lefts and rights of a track can really mess with your muscle memory. So this does make for an interesting challenge. And yes, I did go out of my way to 100% both adventure modes, and I very much enjoyed doing so. Though the adventure mode's not the only feature the game's got game mode wise, for both single player and multiplayer, you've got access to a general single race mode, allowing you to race freely on any unlocked track with any vehicle said track allows. You can also partake in each world's trophy race, and in the case of the first 4 worlds, you also have access to the battle challenges. These are unlocked by finding hidden keys on the tracks, 1 per world, in adventure mode, with emphasis on the hidden. And as I implied before, beating these battle challenges in adventure mode gives you pieces of the TT amulet, which is needed to challenge Wizpig the second time around. But these battle challenges can also be partaken in casually either against AI or other players, and there's a nice variety of challenges. 2 of them are traditional last man standing arena battles, but you've also got this one where you collect 2 bananas at a time and bring them back to your base, with the goal being the first to 10 bananas. Yeah, this one's just kinda eh. But the best battle challenge by far is the egg hatching one. You pick up dinosaur eggs from the center of the arena and fly them back to your nest to hatch. And once they've hatched, they count as a point. First to 3 points wins. However, before they successfully hatch, they're able to be snatched up by other players, thus making it this frantic back and forth of putting your eggs in your nest, stealing others' eggs before they hatch, and protecting your own from your opponents. This one's incredibly fun, and I distinctly remember my sisters and I playing this a ton while we were growing up. Actually, now I think about it, if you were to do the battle challenges in the Mirror Mode campaign, would that make it an Adventure 2 battle? And lastly, there's the time trial mode, allowing you to race freely on each of the tracks with any of the vehicles to get the best time possible. It's pretty standard at face value, but should you get a fast enough time with the track's default vehicle and then do the time trial again, you're put up against the ghost of TT, a companion character you see in all the world hubs. His times can be quite tough to beat, but if you do so on every single track, you unlock TT as a playable character. And this process is a worthwhile time investment, no pun intended, because when playing as him, TT is utterly broken. He's got the highest top speed and acceleration of any character in the game, and while his handling isn't as strong, it's hardly a weakness for him. You play as TT and you can pretty much guarantee victory. Heck, his default top speed is faster than most of the bosses. It's definitely a deserved reward for beating all of his time trial records, and with him at your control, you can basically break the game like a twig. And I don't mean just in winning races, I actually started breaking the game at a few points when playing as him. Now visually, I think this game actually holds up quite well for an early N64 game. The environments are lively and vibrant, and speaking generally, the character models are well crafted in a way that they don't feel too early 3D-esque, which some N64 and PS1 games kinda suffer from. It's also quite impressive that they went full 3D with the characters and vehicles, tires and propellers aside, as opposed to doing sprites for the characters and karts like other kart racers at the time were doing. Now granted, this does result in some frame rate drops here and there when things get a bit intensive, but fortunately, the game remains at a perfectly playable state at those points. Moving on to audio, we've got the voice acting. There's not a whole lot of it in the game beyond racer noises, which do work well. Granted, I could see one claiming the game's a bit too noisy, as the characters do tend to make noises pretty frequently, but I don't mind it. With that said though, let's now get to one of the game's biggest highlights, the music. Diddy Kong Racing's soundtrack was composed by none other than David Wise, the composer of the Donkey Kong Country games. I've already gushed a bunch about his work on Donkey Kong Country 2 in my game soundtracks video with Silver Keyblade, calling it my favorite game soundtrack, period. But having said that, Diddy Kong Racing's easily my second favorite of David Wise's music work. Each piece captures that atmospheric feel David Wise mastered in the DKC soundtracks, all while keeping them at a high level of energy to suit a kart racer. And it's just balanced so perfectly. I already played the character select theme as an example earlier, but to share some other favorites. And that's just from the track themes. Haven't even mentioned stuff like the Battle Challenge theme, or the Boss Race theme, or Whiz Pigs theme. Seriously, this soundtrack is incredible, and I never fail to bounce my hands or feet with the beat whenever I'm listening to these songs. Shoutouts to David Wise, you absolute master of music. That said, even though I love the soundtrack so much, I would never own a physical copy of it, because the game's soundtrack came out at the time when people were experimenting with CD disc shapes. Try playing this in your CD player, I dare you. So yeah, if you couldn't tell, I really like Diddy Kong Racing. Not quite my favorite kart racer, let alone of that era, but man if it ain't an excellent example of just how great this genre can get. Even with its simple mechanics compared to others in the genre, it's incredibly fun, and it provided some pretty out there concepts for a kart racer that not only worked more often than not, but inspired future kart racers to follow suit. And even beyond that, it's just a really pleasant game. From the charming characters, to the vibrant environments, to David Wise's wonderful composing work, it's a very pleasant kart racer that I love coming back to. After Diddy Kong Racing's immense success, work on a sequel inevitably quickly went underway, or rather, multiple sequels. The two more commonly known ones, both of which being shown off at E3 2001, were Donkey Kong Racing for the GameCube, which going off of the released CG trailer was set to incorporate more of the DKC cast and replace the vehicles with DKC's animal buddies, and Diddy Kong Pilot for the Game Boy Advance, which as the title implies was set to exclusively use the plane. However, due to Rareware getting acquired by Microsoft in 2002, both plans ended up being compromised, with Donkey Kong Racing evolving into another game unrelated to Donkey Kong before being cancelled altogether, and Diddy Kong Pilot being converted into a Banjo-Kazooie game, releasing as Banjo Pilot in 2005. But on top of that, another studio known as Climax Studios pitched a Diddy Kong Racing sequel in 2004 called Diddy Kong Racing Adventure, but the pitch was rejected. This game's existence actually didn't become public knowledge until 2016, when a video showcasing the game's prototype surfaced online. Eventually in 2007, Nintendo did release a remake of Diddy Kong Racing for the Nintendo DS, and it was actually developed by Rareware. I was originally gonna review it for this video, but I honestly wasn't the biggest fan of it, and if I am gonna cover it, I'd rather do it in its own video. Not to say I will do it in its own video, but I don't think it really fits in this one. All I will say about it for the time being, though, is that they add new gimmicky ways to do starting boosts in the game, and this is how you do the starting boost with the hovercraft. Can't say I was a big fan of that choice. Though I can at least give the DS version credit for being, at this point in time, the only re-released Diddy Kong Racing seen since its N64 launch. Due to Microsoft's purchase of Rareware and its original IPs, Diddy Kong Racing was unable to be re-released on the Wii or Wii U's virtual consoles, leaving it in original hardware limbo to this very day. However, there is a glimmer of hope. As was recently announced, the Nintendo Switch is going to be getting N64 games added to its Switch Online plan soon, and it was confirmed that among the post-launch titles for the collection was none other than Banjo-Kazooie, another game that never made it to Virtual Console because of Microsoft's acquisition. With this in mind, it's looking like the original Diddy Kong Racing actually could finally see a re-release after all these years. Okay, so quick update. As of earlier today, Nintendo has released the prices for the Switch expansion pack, which includes the N64 online games, and I think Diddy Kong Racing on Switch can wait. With that said, this has been Black Mage Benjamin, and until the next video, have a nice day, everybody.